Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Green Zone podcast here exclusively on our YouTube channel. I'm Cameron Green, your host of today's program. Today, we're going to be dedicating the entire episode to the NFL draft and where that lined up, where we thought guys were going to go. Earlier, had my earlier podcast some weeks, about a month ago, I think, just about predicting where I thought players were going to be going. Um, and we're going to see kind of how that's going to translate towards next season. What I think is going to happen. I think some sleepers, some big hitters towards next season. So welcome to episode 5 of the Green Zone podcast. It's been a few weeks since we've done a pod like this. Check out our last video. I did one on the Minnesota Twins, possible contraction in 2001. So that one is on my podcast as well. Coming up with a new one this week as well. So stay tuned for something like that. A similar episode to that, like last week, excuse me. But we're gonna dive right in. The outlook of the NFL draft happened on Thursday. Mostly for the first round. We're gonna focus kind of on the quarterback position. Where that ended up for some players, where that ended up for some teams. What I had originally, that I had about a few weeks ago, discussing on this podcast, what I thought was gonna be the outlook for certain teams and what actually is gonna be going down. So I mean, we all knew Caleb Williams was gonna go number one overall at Chicago. I was floored to think that was their first number one overall selection in since 1947. So was that 74 years, 75 years, 77 years? I'm a little bad there at math, but um, Caleb, I think, is set now to be a prime spot to be a Pro Bowl type quarterback within 3 years. And I think that happens quicker than we actually want to think we do because they have DJ Moore now. You have Keenan Allen, you have Odunze. They drafted guys and brought guys in for Caleb to be weapons for him right away from the get go. I think they looked at Chicago has to look at and say when Trubisky got drafted second overall. Remember, he was not supposed to start. I think it was Mike Glennon they brought in, and then Glennon basically could not play, and that was quickly thrown out the window. And Trubisky was either thrown to the front, the thrust there, um, or if not Mike Glennon, maybe Nick Foles. But either way, didn't work out pretty quickly. Trubisky was thrown into the limelight uh, probably before he was ready, but he played really well um, his first years there in Chicago. We can't forget that. I mean, we look at the end. I'm gonna look up the numbers right here, but I think what one we cannot forget is at one point in our football world that we thought Mitch Trubisky was going to be the guy, the answer to um, what Chicago had been waiting for so long. And that's the same thing we look at now with like Mac Jones and the Patriots, who I'll get to just a little bit here. But the rookie year, yeah, Trubisky's first year, played 12 games, 4-8 records, 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Not awesome from a rookie, but again, thrown into the limelight at that time. I don't really think you can blame the Bears for that. Did not have a ton of guys in there, that would make them better from the get go. And yeah, they finished 5-11. Trubisky's not obviously getting it done there. But then the next year he comes out with an 11-3 record as a starter. There was 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Chicago wins the division that year. I think that's the year of the double doink year. But Trubisky's a Pro Bowler that year. So always linked to it. Trubisky's a Pro Bowl quarterback within the first 2 years that he was in Chicago. And then I think they look at what they did though, what he did with that Chicago team that did win the division and what Fields did or maybe didn't do in these last 3 years with Justin Fields supposed to be the guy. I think Chicago is building themselves to be sort of, I don't want to call it like insurance for Caleb, but it'd be really easy to expose Caleb for being fraudulent if anyone wants to call him that, or any sort of real lack of weapons on the field that can expose his weaknesses. If you have a Keenan Allen, you have a DJ Moore, you have a Romeo Dunze, guys in the fold already to help you out to make your life that much easier. There's no way that Caleb is going to be that bad of a quarterback from the get go. I mean, he's in line to start right away. I don't see any reason why Chicago would go elsewhere. It's not like they have a lot going for them already. Adding some key pieces, they had a ton of money to spend. They went out and spent some money which I'd like to see from one of them teams. I originally had Caleb going number one. Chicago takes him number one overall. Of course, we all knew that. But that's also a spot where I think Chicago. I don't think it's really that far out there to say Chicago gets a wild card spot next year. I don't think it's wild for them to improve by 2 games, 3 games from what they've done in the offseason with the acquisitions. Now, Detroit and Green Bay got vastly better over the last few seasons, where Chicago had been building towards a season like this season where it's going to come to. You think you have the quarterback, you put in the work to get the receivers for him. You have some work on defense. They made some good moves last year on defense that made the Bears defense at least a little bit acceptable compared to years past. But I think this is the year that Chicago is building towards possibly being a wild card team. But again, you're going to play Detroit twice. You're going to play Green Bay twice. You're going to play Minnesota twice. But Minnesota right now, I mean, no one really quite knows how that is looking for them, this year. But um, I don't think it's really that wild to say that Chicago could be a wild card team at worst. Even like a thing, their ceiling might be win the division title at 12-5, 11-6. And I'm not saying that's totally reliant on Caleb being a superstar right away, because Jordan Love played his butt off last year. Jared Goff's still Jared Goff. I mean, he's going to have to prove himself in the NFC North, but it's not as weak of a division, I think, as some people want to think, with 2 teams on top in Green Bay and Detroit, and 2 teams at the bottom with Chicago and Minnesota. I could very much see 3 teams competing for that top spot in the NFC North, exactly where Caleb Williams wants to be from year one. Now, I originally had Jaden Daniels going to the Washington Commanders. That was also seen to fruition there, that Jaden Daniels is now a Washington Commander. They got their guy. I think they were, everyone's teetering and tottering back and forth. Yeah, who's the better prospect? Is it Drake May? Is it Jaden Daniels? There was the report that Jaden apparently wasn't very happy in his spot with the mass workout they had with 21 or 22 other people, if I'm not mistaken. But Jaden Daniels, I think, is a perfect fit for what Washington wants to do. If you look at where they've been quarterback wise since really the departure of Kirk Cousins, it's been kind of a little teeter totter of what are we doing? They had Ryan Fitzpatrick, Taylor Heineke, Sam Howell. Now I think they can for sure lock in a guy at number 2 that they've wanted to get a quarterback of this caliber for some time. Reminds me of drafting RG3 second overall a decade ago. Has shades of that, I think, elements to that, where Jaden Daniels could be both a passing threat, but also a running threat. But he has weapons around him too. Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson Jr. Washington might not be as bad as people want to think either. Do I think they're going to be 1 or 2 in the division? Probably not. Do I think they can be better than the Giants? Well, depending on how Daniel Jones is or isn't, or how Tommy DeVito is or isn't, whoever's in that quarterback room come opening week. I do think that Washington will be slightly better than the Giants, maybe at a 7-10 record, a 6-11, somewhere around that. The Giants might be flirting with maybe being in the same position next year draft wise, drafting 6th overall. We don't really know exactly what they're going to be looking at, but Washington, I think, now has spent years building towards a quarterback of Jaden Daniels. Everyone that pretty much drafted, I think, on Thursday a quarterback, Chicago all the way through Denver, I think was building towards this for the few years. And I'm going to make a prediction later in this little podcast episode about what I think next year is going to look like. I've said to people around me before, and I've been told that, hey, it's not a terrible far out there shot, but I'll bring it up there in a second. But Jaden Daniels, Washington, working towards something in there. And it's not like he's taking over for a guy that had promise. There's a guy, Jaden Daniels, that is taking over for a spot that is rightfully his, walking into an arena and trying to, I don't want to say revive Washington football, but definitely bring a spark to the Commanders that they have really been since they departed from being the Redskins. No one since there's been the Commanders has been flashy at the quarterback position. I think Jaden Daniels has a chance to bring this team back to relevance for the foresee future in football in Washington. Now, Drake May goes number 3 overall in New England. It's exactly where I had him, number 3 overall. And I think New England finally gets their guy too, I think, in a sense, but he's taken over for a guy, Mac Jones, the experiment that just simply did not work anymore. It's not rocket science to say that Mac Jones just wasn't the right fit for New England down the line. I think Mac played really well that first year um, in New England, and it's really tough to say because we look at a lot of quarterbacks right now, C.J. Stroud, Andrew Luck, some guys as of recent that have really solid first years and then sort of seem to fall off. We don't know about Stroud and some of these guys, but it flips the other direction too. Of I remember after that first year of Mac Jones, we thought he was the best quarterback in that draft. Looking at it where everyone lined up with Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, it looked like Mac was the clear best quarterback in that draft at that moment. Now, Trevor Lawrence is significantly rose above the pack with Trey Lance really never getting a chance so far. Fields is on to his second team. Mac's going to be Trevor's backup in a weird way, and Zach Wilson moving to Denver. But I think that New England is finally starting to break the bridge from the Brady era and now towards the new era in a way sort of sense because I think Belichick has been tied to Brady for so long too that even though Tom left when he did, Belichick was still there. So it was kind of still seen as, well, we can still make it happen because Bill Belichick's here, and rightfully so. That's probably should be the mindset every year in New England. But I think now with Gerard Mayo being the head coach and Drake May being the new quarterback and going to get some new guys there, we don't know if Debo Samuel is going to be a New England Patriot, but there's certainly a scenario where New England could be within 2 to 3 to 4 years could be atop that AFC East division. I don't think it's uh, too boldly to say that. I think the Jets are trying to get whatever they can out of Aaron Rodgers left. That's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. He says he wants to play for longer than he might actually fit there. Um, but the Dolphins are certainly having their window. Is it fluctuating? Is it now? Is it in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? I mean, everyone's got to go through Mahomes and Kansas City, but where does Miami fit into that context? And then looking where the Bills are, Stephon Diggs left the division. It's gone. Buffalo has to find new weapons. I think anytime Josh Allen's gonna be there, I mentioned earlier in a past episode, I think anytime that Josh Allen's in Buffalo, they're gonna have a chance because he is that talented. He is that good of a thrower. He is that good of a runner. He's 6'5", 6'6". You can plug and play different position guys there, and I think it'll work out just fine. Um, Now, in the case of Drake May and the Patriots, it's going to take a few years. I don't think Drake's going to come out right away. If he is the opening day quarterback, even if, I would think they brought in Jacoby Brissett for a reason. I think Jacoby's going to start until Drake's ready. They feel maybe 6, 7 games, maybe not at all. But it's going to take time in New England. I don't see them really making huge leaps this year. Um, but I can definitely see New England being back to where they want to be uh, little to no than 3 to 4 years after this draft, on Thursday. Um, Even, possibly in the next 2 years, picking towards the back end of the first round instead of being near the top. Now, I never had a spot for Michael Penix Jr. On my rankings beforehand. I didn't think Michael Penix Jr. was going to be a first rounder. I'll jot it up there. I think there were other people out there that said second round talent. There were people that said Bo Nix the same thing, and Bo Nix was a first round quarterback. Just because I think if you didn't get your quarterback, and it showed, if you didn't get your quarterback in the top 12, you weren't going to get a quarterback till Spencer Rattler in round 5. That was, you either address the quarterback position now, or it's kind of like speak now, forever hold your peace. Grab your quarterback now, or you're just not going to get one this year. And Penix Jr. going to Atlanta, I'm confused. I'm very confused by it. I don't understand. I think just like everyone else, this has the potential to break Atlanta. And I mean this in the nicest way possible to all Atlanta football fans, or towards that whole process they've been working towards now getting a new coach with Raheem Morris there. This has a chance to be disastrous for Atlanta. Now, hear me out. Kirk Cousins is under contract for 4 years, 3 of them guaranteed. So that fourth year might not even happen. in Atlanta. He's 35 years old. He's coming off an Achilles injury. No one truly knows how Kirk is going to respond to that Achilles being hurt. Uh, is it going to linger into the season? Is it going to affect the way he drops back? Is it going to affect the way he's able to scramble out of the pocket, maybe make some throws? We have no idea. Nobody knows exactly how this is going to work out for Kirk Cousins. What the only thing though is when you handed him the contract that you did, 150 million plus. I don't understand why you don't address needs that you have right now that could make you better right now. The NFC South is up for grabs. That I think everyone knows is going to happen. I don't see Carolina winning more than maybe 4 games next year, 5, 6 games, if Bryce Young has an incredibly bounce back season, which I think he might well. New Orleans, I don't think is going to improve that much either. They're going to be, I think, right at 8-9, 9-8, maybe a 10-win team at max. You might squeak in a wild card spot. And I think at some point Spencer Rattler's going to start a game for the Saints at quarterback next year. Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay won the division last year by, this much. And if any sort of spot where Baker Mayfield regresses next year, he has a nice home in Tampa now. I think they're going to try to work on the things that he did wrong last year, which, to be honest, wasn't that much. Protected the ball really well, uses weapons really well. But Tampa has an aspect to step back even slightly. If you take away 2 wins in that team, that's a 7-8 win team from this year. They take a step back next year, possibly 7-8 games. I think Atlanta has done what they needed to do to win the NFC South and to play a postseason game by signing Kirk Cousins. That's what I mean. New coaching, maybe Kyle Pitts will be utilized more. Bijan Robinson should be way more used, both in the running and receiving game department. Drake London has tremendous upside. They have such a young core in there, and you throw Kirk in there, the veteran experience. Kirk's a 4-time Pro Bowler. Kirk has a resume that, although it doesn't sound great on paper in terms of wins and losses, can produce good numbers, and in a game full of numbers can win you games. Can beat Carolina, can beat New Orleans, can beat Tampa. I don't understand why drafting a quarterback at number 8 was the main focus. Quarterbacks will come and go in the first round for a few more years, but you draft a 24-year-old quarterback who has severe medical problems heading into the draft, played 1 solid year at Washington after transferring from Indiana, having not so great numbers, and he's 8th overall. I don't understand the number of that when he starts. If this Kirk goes the 4 years, he'll be 28 years old. 28 going on 29 when he gets the ball for the first time. Does this mean that Atlanta has a plan in place that's going to already drive Kirk out after a year or two? Kirk always says he wanted to be a 1-team quarterback, 2-team quarterback, now a 3-team quarterback. Is that going to happen for Kirk Cousins? Financially, it says yes. Financially, it says we pay you this amount of money for these many years. You're going to be here until you're 39 years old. Retire an Atlanta Falcon, done story, hell of a career, and we move on. But why does Atlanta feel the need to move on right now? It feels like you can prepare for the future. I totally get that. You want to find your quarterback of the future beyond Kirk Cousins. JJ McCarthy is 21 years old. Drake May is 21 years old. By the time those guys get to their 3rd or 4th year, they'll be in the same spot that Penix is in right now. If JJ McCarthy flops in the NFL after 2 or 3 years, he'll be 24 years old. If Michael Penix flops the NFL after 2 or 3 years, he'll be 27, 28 years old. I don't understand why Atlanta didn't pounce on the opportunity to say, we are solid at the quarterback position and we will add assets even if Kirk regresses. He's going to be 35, coming off an Achilles tear. It's bound for him to not play as well as he did before. But can the other parts of the puzzle that we bring in help supplement Kirk and maybe upgrade his quarterback position or up his quarterback play by winning games that we didn't think we could win because we have a solid defensive player, extra offensive weapons. Is there something that they could have done to add to that, kind of piece of the puzzles, like I mentioned just a second ago? I don't get why Michael Penix went number 8 overall. And I'm not saying it's a diss on Michael Penix at all. Michael Penix probably should have went in the first round, probably. Vegas obviously seemed in line to take a quarterback if Penix was falling. And I think that Vegas probably presumed that we, as in the Minnesota Vikings and Minnesota kid, thinking about Minnesota Vikings here, we're going to jump up to number 5, trade with the Chargers. Okay. Joe Alt would go 7th overall to the Titans. Atlanta wouldn't take a quarterback, and then you sit there at, maybe Vegas would trade up to 7 to 8 to 10 and take a quarterback, probably presuming to be Penix. And when Minnesota didn't want to trade up and LA didn't trade back, Atlanta was in a tough spot because, again, if you, like I said before, speak up now or forever hold your peace. Get your quarterback or shut up. You don't get one. And I think Atlanta said, we're going to get one. This is put up or shut up time. And I'm not saying it's a little bit of a stretch to take Penix at 8. Penix probably could have went 8 if a certain team traded up to number 8. I'm saying it's a stretch for Atlanta to gamble and mortgage the house. It's like saying if I just bought a new car, but I don't want it to get wet, so I'm going to buy another car, so I drive that car when it rains. It might not ever rain. Atlanta might not ever have to use Penix. If this Kirk situation works out for 2, 3, 4 years, then what did you do? You drafted a quarterback. We even saw with San Francisco having Trey Lance, they got a 4th round, 5th round pick from Dallas. You're not going to get the value return you got back. You could have probably moved back, gotten a few more picks, and added defensive parts to your offense or your defense. And that could have been it. I don't get why Atlanta felt the need to stretch Penix out when there was other players at the point for them that they could take. So I'm not slamming Michael Penix at all. The kid's got an enormous amount of potential. He has a great talent. I just don't think that's a good fit in Atlanta for what they want to do right now. So I'll move on from there. Now, Minnesota. The Vikings answered their quarterback problem. Just got done talking about Kirk Cousins, but we'll address it back again. J.J. McCarthy, the owner of the 3rd best winning percentage in college football history, is a Minnesota Viking. As a Viking fan, Drake May probably would have been my first choice if they would have been able to move up to 3 and grab him from New England. But McCarthy, I think, works out just fine. I had McCarthy either going to Denver at trading up to maybe 9 or Minnesota at 11, ultimately falling to Minnesota at pick number 11. And I think this works out great for Minnesota too, because they can officially kind of bridge the aspect between Kirk and the next future too, in terms of the new coaches, new GMs that inherited Kirk's contract, but re-signed him to keep that market and that potential in there, because the Vikings have been competitive really for the last 4 years, the exception of last season. They've been pretty competitive under Kirk's tenure, and I think that they didn't see a lot better out there to go grab a quarterback, so we're officially just going to take one. But I think McCarthy's good for the new management, for new coach, Kevin O'Connell, to develop, getting a true prospect, not Kellen Mond in the 3rd round, or not getting a young kid in there who's obviously not the future at the quarterback position. You might never know. You might find guys down those diamonds in the rough. But, I think J.J. McCarthy to the Vikings is a perfect fit. I think he's a great system quarterback. He played really well in that Jim Harbaugh system. And people say Kevin O'Connell has the greatest system in football right now. That's where we're at right now. I think McCarthy to Minnesota makes perfect sense, because I think it perfectly allows him to competitively rebuild too. I don't think he'll play hardly at all this year. Just making a prediction that might be out there. I think they're fully prepared to have Sam Darnold play all of this year. especially if you look at what the starts Detroit, Green Bay, and Chicago get out to. If it comes by week 6 and the Vikings are 2-4 and the Lions are 5-1, the Packers are 4-2, and the Bears are 4-2, or somewhere in that range, more wins than the Vikings have. Um, I don't think throwing him in there is going to do much. We've seen teams have second half comebacks and good runs down the stretch. I just don't think that's going to be for Minnesota next year. Fully accepting this is a process. McCarthy will take over in year 2 fully, and hopefully hit the ground running. You'll have Jefferson hopefully signing his record-setting extension as he deserves. But McCarthy to 11, we'll see how much playing time he really gets. But Minnesota, I think, found a gem in that not seeing that much throwing on the table. It's hard to say. The sample size is smaller. The games are fewer and far in between his big games and his small games, i.e., the national championship only throwing 18 times, completing 10 passes. But if you're going to dwell on that, I think you're also going to need to look at what he did in the system. And winning matters. I know there's a lot of goes into it for a quarterback that wins don't matter, but uh, he's the one that leaves college with a national championship and a ring on his hand. And I think he looks to add to do the same. Now we'll have to see what Minnesota looks to do as we kind of officially sort of enter the new season. Minnesota is obviously the worst team in the North. If we speak right now, Detroit, Green Bay, Chicago have gotten infinitely better in the last couple of years. Minnesota losing Daniil Hunter, losing Kirk Cousins, losing KJ Osborne. I know Alexander Madison didn't do a lot last year, but you lost him. Christian Davenport, DJ Wanham, you go on and on. Greg Joseph. There's gonna be a lot of new pieces building it into it, but I think if they fully accept the rebuild coming, Minnesota could go probably 5-12, 6-11. I think it's gonna maybe at best an 8-win team. I don't see them making the playoffs that much, but I would like to see them at least be competitive and show signs of greatness as we look at what the future holds. But McCarthy to Minnesota, I think works out perfectly. And lastly, we'll talk about Bo Nix. Bo Nix going to Denver at 12. A pick that many see as a stretch. And is it really that Denver was in love with Bo Nix, or they're just trying to steal him away from Vegas because Vegas would have taken a quarterback regardless? It's tough to say what Bo was going to look like in Denver. Sean Payton forced Russell Wilson out, and then Denver management forced him out. Um, I just want to address that. I did correctly pick Russell Wilson to Pittsburgh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Uh, I did have Justin Fields to the Falcons. I never saw him going to Pittsburgh, but I did have Kirk returning to Minnesota. But Denver sits in an awkward spot because their quarterback room is now fully loaded with Zach Wilson now. You're gonna have Bo Nix. You're gonna have a few guys that who's gonna start coming opening season. Are you gonna still try and develop Zach Wilson, or is this kind of over from the looks of it? If you're gonna hitch your wagon to Bo Nix, it looks like the Zach Wilson project is over in the NFL. At least as the starting quarterback. So we'll see what happens to him coming in the future. But Denver's in a spot where they can obviously look to get better for a few years, but they're not better than the division's kind of wide open, except for the number 1 spot. Kansas City will probably win 13 games this year. Are the Chargers going to regress? Justin Herbert has no weapons now. The Chargers might win about 7 games. The Raiders might win close to that, and Denver could win a little bit more. So, are they going to squeak by and win a division title? No. Are they going to be a wild card spot? Probably not. Denver and the AFC West is regressing very much so, and I think Kansas City will pounce on that and get better for the future. So I'm looking at what next year looks like. I got big hitters, guys I think need to improve, not only their team but to prove themselves. Number 1 for me, and this is a dark horse for MVP, Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence has to prove something to the AFC South and to Jacksonville fans that CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans are not going to run over that division. A healthy Anthony Richardson in that division as well. The Titans, too, are looking to try and get their piece of the puzzle back after losing Derrick Henry and whatnot to free agency. Trevor Lawrence has to prove that he is an elite quarterback and make that step towards being a superstar that everyone thought he was going to be coming out of high school and college. I think Trevor Lawrence, for me, a super, super, super dark horse for MVP. But I think to do with the tremendous upside, we haven't really seen the full effect of Lawrence. And after getting hurt last year, wasn't that effective, but we want to see a healthy Trevor Lawrence. That might be the difference maker in what makes Jacksonville and the AFC South competitive uh, or not. And you look at other divisions too, the AFC North. Uh, Lamar Jackson has already proved himself two-time MVP. Can Baltimore maintain that? Can Joe Burrow play a whole season healthy and actually give the Bengals a shot? We've seen Burrow at a full what he's capable at full strength. The Super Bowl appearance, uh, Denver being one of the best teams in the league, but he's only played a full season in half of his 4 years. Can we see a full season of Joe Burrow like we did in 21 and 22? And can Cincinnati somehow make its way back to the top of the AFC North if the Ravens somehow regress in some way, shape, or form? And I think we move to the NFC, another big hitter, dark horse that has to prove himself, has to showcase what they can do. Not saying this guy hasn't before. And, obviously, this team is trying to find itself a little bit of ways. But Kyler Murray, I'm going with Kyler Murray because I think that he has the talent to be maybe not an elite quarterback, but an above average quarterback if he's not already. But I think we need to really look at Arizona. Just a few years ago, last year and the year before, being kind of laughing stock to the NFL. Arizona last year was very close to being a playoff quality team. Obviously, it didn't work out to the way they wanted to, but finishing last year in that NFC West, 4-13, they showed glimmers of being uh, having a good amount of work, but 3-9 in the NFC, they were 0-6 in the division. Kyler Murray has to show that he's still the future of the Cardinals. Now they won 4 games, the second worst team in the NFC. I think that they can somehow compete with Seattle, with LA, and they might be able to sneak in by if we've seen anything as a wild card team. CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans have completely changed the way we look at teams year in and year out. No one thought that they were going to win the division last year. No one thought they were going to win a playoff game, and here we are. So I see no reason to why Arizona might not be able to climb a few games and squeak by as a playoff team next season. And I'll be doing those predictions and those things way as we come more into training camp and whatnot, as football season kind of will slowly start to kick back in. But the draft is sort of the biggest night of the year. It's like fantasy football. When you draft your team, everything looks fun. And then the nitty and gritty things will happen come June, July, August, and as we kick off towards another football season. So I want to thank you for tuning in with me today. The exclusive NFL draft post game, if you want to call it that, post draft podcast episode 5 here, the Green Zone Podcast. Make sure to follow us on our Twitter page at GreenZonePod. Subscribe to us at the Green Zone Podcast as well, Green Zone Pod on YouTube. Want to wish you guys all the best. Thank you for listening and tuning in to me today. Hope we'll see you next week. We'll see you guys next week. I have a few videos in line. But thank you for listening today to the Green Zone Podcast. Peace out, everybody.